On a cruise ship, we travel the Baltic Sea, along routes that have connected the cultures of the region since ancient times. A journey of discovery in the extraordinary light of a short Nordic summer. On the first leg of our trip, we visit a Viking settlement, an artistically talented livestock breeder, heat-resistant craftsman, and the captain of a Stockholm scary taxi. Our tour, once around the Baltic Sea, takes us from Sweden to Finland, then on to St. Petersburg, and all the way to the Baltic countries. We first travel along Sweden's south coast, past Foteviken on the Öresund and Sandhammaren in Småland, to the Kingdom of Crystal by Costa, and then put in at Visby in Gotland. Finally, we navigate the skerries of the Stockholm archipelago. Almost 300 meters long and 36 meters wide. With a good 3,000 people on board, this huge vessel is like a floating hotel complex that guests can only leave at ports of call for short excursions, or shore leave in naval jargon. On a pleasure cruise, visits to destinations on the route are usually limited to 2 days at most. The ship puts into port in the morning and stays until late afternoon, setting course for the next region during the night. The typical cruise offers a tour of 6 to 10 days. On its Baltic Sea route, the big tub covers around 2,300 nautical miles, a good 4,100 kilometers. While aboard ship, the breakfast bustle is in full throttle and everyone looks forward to an exciting excursion. On land, the day has long since begun. In the Viking village of Foteviken on the Öresund, the baker prepares to fire up his oven to bake the day's crisp bread for the village community. In the Kingdom of Crystal, another tour destination, the early shift at the glassworks is also already well underway, producing the coveted artisan wares. Meanwhile, in Gotland, Jenny calls her herd in from the meadow for feeding. After their first birthday, the sheep are given a name, according to successive letters of the alphabet. This year's was the J flock, Jolin, Jannica, Jule, Jödet, Jutte. But Jenny still relies mainly on beating her bucket to round up the flock in the morning.
I can't call each one to come by name. This way I call all the lambs and the whole herd comes running.
Most days on board begin with a similar routine. While some still linger over breakfast, others enjoy the morning light of a beautiful summer's day. They read the morning paper, sent over by post. Or keep a lookout as the ship approaches the shoreline. Foteviken near Malmö. Here on the Öresund, a battle took place in 1134 between the Danish king Niels and an insurgent, Erik Imune. The confrontation was also waterborne, and several boats went down in the clash.
För 35 år sedan.
35 years ago, we discovered the first Viking ship off Fotteviken out there. And that really piques your curiosity. My entire life has been shaped by my curiosity, by figuring out how something's done. How do you build a ship? How do you build a forge? How do I forge something? All of it handcraft, fantastic handcraft. But nowadays, Björn Butler Jakobsen no longer does manual labor. He has his subjects for that. As founder of the Viking village, Jakobsen's job as king is to see that everything keeps running smoothly. When he and others salvaged 5 Viking vessels here 30 years back, a museum village was born, where he and a group of enthusiasts have spent every summer since reviving the daily life of their ancestors. Tending vegetable gardens, working in the forge, weaving and baking bread. Crisp bread, the kind their ancestors took with them on long voyages. Preserving supplies, diet, clothing, building construction, all just like it was 900 years ago. Even the stoves are chimney-free. The smoke is just sucked out through a hatch in the roof, the only way the fire can be regulated. It is from this area that the Vikings, simple farmers at the time, are thought to have set out to conquer new settlement territory.
Den äldste sonen fick allt.
The eldest son inherited everything. Daughters were married off and younger brothers left empty-handed.
Fick
They had to
ingenting.
go in search of new land, a free patch where they could build their own
Ny
home.
plats och bygga sitt hus. Men plötsligt
But suddenly there was no land left. All of it had been claimed.
stod där ett gäng.
But then, groups of disaffected youth hatched the plan of building a ship and sailing off to find new terrain elsewhere.
Så ser vi hittade mark. Och så börjar
That's how the Vikings started to stake out territories in Europe,
med
on ships with sails as well as oars.
ros och seglas.
So instead of just rowing, the young Vikings used a cutting-edge innovation: woolen sails impregnated with animal fat. The present-day villagers have built a ship based on the old Viking model and have taken it on extended journeys. As long as the ship stays in the water, the wood remains stable. The planks won't shrink.
Hela vikingatiden är ju oerhört spännande.
The whole Viking age is incredibly fascinating because it all started with the art of sailmaking.
Göra
And to be able to make sails, you need a lot of wool. Only then could we manufacture the sails and then sail away.
kunde producera mycket segel.
Before that time, people basically just paddled along the coastline in their rowboats.
Mycket mer med sina farkoster längs kusterna etc.
It was mainly young Vikings who took off in their little boats to seek their fortune in the Baltic region, or the swamplands of what would later be St. Petersburg. From there, they traveled along river routes all the way to the Black Sea. But here it's not so much about scientifically researching the ancestral achievements. It's really all about actually experiencing Viking daily life as authentically as possible. The villagers try to taste and feel how their Swedish ancestors ate, slept, worked, and lived. Life today in the museum village, a journey in time. Emotionally, too.
Alltså att komma hit en tidig morgon.
Well, to come out here in the early morning,
Frosten.
when the morning frost is still in the air, or a bit of fog,
Lite små
it feels like you're stepping right back into history.
historien. Eller att bara sitta här
Or just to sit here, like right now, watching the sunrise or sunset. A fantastic view.
röd mot det här fantastiska.
Yes, moments like that give me goosebumps for sure.
Gåshud alltså, helt klart.
A few kilometers on, some strange rocks are the subject of passionate speculation. Giant, standing stones. A burial grounds, some assert. A solar calendar, say others. Some people are convinced it's a legendary site and come to investigate this special energy. They report that sensitive animals refuse to set foot in the open center space. It is only from the air, looking straight down, that one sees a ship. Alice Stenar, the Stones of Ale, the Swedish Stonehenge. 59 megastones, the largest at the bow pointing out towards the open sea. The Baltic Sea, now 37 meters lower than the ship, must have come right up to where it rests at the time it was built, eye level with the figure of the vessel putting out to sea. The coast here, as at many other places on the Baltic Sea, rose considerably after the last ice age. Back on the cruise ship, we continue on along the coast of southern Sweden. On travel days, when the ship crosses the open sea during the daytime instead of at night, the deck is transformed into an open-air fitness studio. To stay in shape and to burn off at least a few of the many calories that lavish cruise ship dining brings, many guests try to get some exercise, if possible in the fresh air. Cycling with a sea view, for example. Sometimes the sea itself is quite exercised. At a wind force of 7 upwards, Baltic Sea waves can tower to over 5 meters. Real monster breakers. The team on the bridge under Captain Jens Troja has various strategies to cope with rough seas, including choosing a route with the most manageable waves possible.
My
teacher at nautical college always said, if you get seasick, keep working, drink fresh water, and eat white bread. The work part is just to keep you distracted. But you should never have a completely empty stomach, because then, when your insides eventually find their way out, it gets really unpleasant. The one touchy case, and it applies to all ships, when your aft deck starts pushing along athwart a wave and the vessel starts to do a little jig, then the going does get tough, especially for the passengers. At times like this, the bar trade slows right down, with a sharp increase in tea orders. Some chew anti-nausea gum, others wear acupressure armbands. And a modern cruise ship deploys all the advanced technology at its disposal. In stormy weather, the ship's stabilizers are extended below the water's surface. When we do hit rough seas, they only help to counteract rolling the sideways tilt of the ship, but they have no effect on pitching when the ship dips headlong into the wave. Basically, they work like the air deflectors on an aircraft, the brake flaps, always counteracting what the wave does to the ship, so the rolling motion is equalized by the angle of the flaps. These technological helpers are actually very effective, but when the rolling starts in earnest, they're only really meant to soften the blow. And I can't calm the rough seas. Unfortunately not. Does the captain sometimes get seasick? I have colleagues who do, but I must say, thanks to my submarine training, where all of that was a bit more intense, I've never been seasick, and I won't start now. The day's explorations began in Tvoteviken on the Öresund. Now we'll head for St. Hanmaren. Then on to the Kingdom of Crystal near Kosta, and after that to the island of Gotland, where the cruise ship will finally drop anchor. First things first, In Småland, on the coast of southern Sweden, lies Sandhammaren, the largest ship's cemetery in the Baltic Sea. Several thousand sunken vessels rest on the seafloor there. But caution, it's no place for diving. The currents that drove the sailors onto the sandbars hundreds of years ago are still too dangerous today. The shoals off the coastline remain highly treacherous. Depending on storm conditions and currents, they can shift position overnight. That's why Sandhammaren became home to the first Baltic Sea nautical rescue station. This equipment has helped rescue hundreds of shipwrecked mariners from stormy seas. A mini missile was used to shoot a rope over to the boat stranded on the sandbar. This rescue line could then be fastened to the mast. Margareta Nyregård demonstrates.
Allt som skulle ut på
Everything needed out there on the beach for a rescue mission, that's all here.
Här är då ett långt rep. Man behövde
A long rope. It took 300 meters to get this seat out to the boat out there in the water.
Och detta plus
And this toe here
det här linan här
was attached to a sort of block,
ska ut och ett block
like the one over there,
skulle ut till
and was then guided out to the boat. So you had something like a cable car to get everyone off the ship.
För att få ut alla saker som behövdes. Jo, det är en farlig plats.
This is a perilous spot for seafaring because the coastline is tricky here in our neck of the woods. Currents that suddenly change direction, constantly changing winds. And then the 3 sandbars that run alongside the coast, especially hazardous for sailboats that run aground here. If you get stuck on the outermost sandbar, it's very difficult to work your way free again. Instead, you then start drifting towards land, where vessels then get trapped in the waves.
Man driver in mot land istället, så att båtarna fastnar här.
Despite all the still present perils, this beach is now considered a dreamy destination, popular with vacationers and locals alike for its summery climate and the highest water temperatures in all of Sweden. Once upon a time, beacon fires on the Sandhammaren shore served ships as a landmark. But pirates, specialized in flotsam and jetsam, lit decoy fires that often lured the ships into the dangerous shoals instead. There, the buccaneers plundered the vulnerable shipwrecked vessels. In the 17th century, the king ordered the oak forest there cleared, removing the thieves' preferred hideout. But without trees, the coast became a sandy desert. Not until later did the people of Sandhammaren build their lighthouse. The pirates disappeared, and the forest recovered. And the sand would turn out to be a blessing for the Smålanders. Sand, silicate, is after all a key raw material for the glass industry. About 100 kilometers further along our route, Sweden's crater. After the last ice age, the entire region here sank and now lies almost 2.5 meters below sea level. Just a few minutes' drive away, Kugakul. Here, too, the Ice Age has left its traces. A conspicuously large number of glacial erratics pepper the landscape. Huge boulders that often traveled hundreds of kilometers on the migrating glaciers, and when the kilometers-thick ice layer melted, they simply remained behind. A bit further eastwards, some industrious souls found good use for the sand from the coast. In the 18th century, the Glasriket, realm of glass or kingdom of crystal, came into being, creating thousands of jobs. Kosta, a center of the glass-blowing trade since 1742. While most of our everyday drinking glasses are now mass-produced by machine, here, the artisan craft is kept alive. In impressively large production runs, teams of 10 glassblowers, turnout glasses for not quite so everyday use. Certain glassblowers, such as Ulf Gunnar Persson, also make unique pieces, art. I spent 10 years making wine glasses. I've been working in this trade for 15 years now, all told. Wine glasses require skill too, but it becomes increasingly monotonous over time when you blow 90 glasses an hour. When you make art, you produce maybe one piece an hour. It takes much more time and is more labor-intensive, but more inspiring. Working with glass like this is playing with fire. Despite his experience, Ulf Gunnar often burns his fingers, almost daily, he says. But you can't be too wimpy about it. As a small boy, he dreamt of being a fireman, even though it was pretty much always clear what he'd be when he grew up. It's a long-standing family tradition. I was raised in a glassworks, so to speak. My father was a glassblower, and my grandfather. I've been around this work from the start, and then I started working here right after finishing school. Basically, you can make anything you like with glass here. Your personal limitations are the only constraint. You can make anything. It's like forming clay with your fingers. Except that this here heats up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. By and large, you can make whatever you want. And that's a lot of fun. Back on board, off the coast of southern Sweden. The cruise phenomenon is barely 130 years old. To redress poor winter occupancy rates, shipping companies decided to send their transatlantic steamers on leisure trips to warmer destinations. Italy, the Orient. Instead of transportation, pleasure cruise. Back then, 241 passengers could travel, say, on the Augusta Victoria for about 2,000 gold marks per person, double an average working class annual income. A crew of 245 was on hand to keep the customers satisfied. Half of them worked under deck as stokers in the boiler room. This cruise ship, built in 2015, can house almost 10 times as many passengers. More than 2,000. A crew of 1,000 is on board to look after them. The kitchen staff alone numbers 200. Next stop on our journey, Gotland. After the last ice age, when the glaciers had melted, the earth there veritably inhaled, and the land lifted. Gotland and the neighboring small islands rose up out of the sea. Gotland, together with Faroe, is part of a tectonic plate that continues to lift up from the ocean, another several centimeters every year. In the meantime, our ship was approaching the island. Until just a few years ago, cruise ships had to drop anchor offshore. Tender boats were used to ferry shore leavers on land, a time-consuming and, when winds were high, unsteady affair. The capital Visby has adapted to tourism, and the many day trippers can now disembark at a modern pier. Big cruise liners are now a constant feature of the medieval city. 1,000 years ago, with the Crusades making the caravan roads between the Orient and Europe too dangerous, the trade routes moved to the water, including the rivers of Eastern Europe and the Baltic Sea. Visby became a reputable marketplace for international goods trading. Already a key port city in Viking days, under the Hanseatic League, it became a hub of the Baltic Sea region. Leading merchants from neighboring countries set up harborside operations here. By the end of the 13th century, Visby could boast 15 churches. But the wealth of the city provoked greedy desire. Numerous armed conflicts repeatedly laid parts of the city to waste. Most of the houses of worship were reduced to ruins. Wars, trade, and seafaring took the men of Gotland off to far-flung places, with consequences for the island. Women increasingly picked up the slack in the business world, managing trading companies and working as craftswomen, bakers, and beer brewers. And then, as now, as shepherdesses. But the 300-strong herd Jenny Granlund keeps on the Ansar farm are raised not so much for their flesh, but for their pelts. Jenny left the island as a young woman to study art in Stockholm, but now she's back to stay.
This wool is from Gotland pelt sheep. We're known for these sheep throughout the entire world. Incredibly high quality, the curls here. The sheepskin pelt has a magical shine and a wide range of uses.
Most of the island's sheep are gray, not beige or white. But Jenny still gets great results dyeing the wool without bleaching at first.
Yes, I have to say, I'm really in love with this gray wool because it allows for a unique depth of color, a very special, rich color spectrum.
And so gray becomes intensive green, for example. From the wool, Jenny spins weaving and knitting yarn with a spinning wheel she inherited from her grandmother. Jenny is all about handcraft.
My grandmother used to spin wool when I was little, and she also taught me how to spin. But there's one thing I do completely differently. She spun the thread much finer. I like the finished garn to be thicker, less refined.
The more crude yarn is in higher demand nowadays for knitwear, and it's easier to spin, though the thread still tangles easily in the process.
Wool, I believe, is in our marrow. It's part of our history. We've lived with wool for so long. Going back 50,000 years in time, I think that's rooted deep in our genes.
On a pleasant summer's day with lovely weather, Jenny has an important appointment. She's been preparing it for weeks. She chooses the most beautiful beasts in her herd to bring before a panel of judges who will decide if they can be admitted to a key fall auction for breeding livestock. That could be an additional source of income.
It's all very suspenseful because it could turn out that I've chosen the wrong lambs, and then everyone else will see. Because all the farmers and other shepherds get the inspection results. Then everyone knows if you have good or bad lambs, so it could have an unpleasant outcome. Suspenseful.
The appraisers mostly get to grips with a fur coat, examine curls, skin and wool, with fingertips and Argus eyes. Individual scores are noted. An enigmatic sheep expert shorthand. Over the weekend, they assess umpteen sheep from different breeders, a good basis for comparison. And what does that mean for Jenny?
I'm not very satisfied with the result. Actually, it went really badly. But okay, it is what it is. Now we're going home to have a good cup of coffee. The lambs are beautiful anyway. I like them. That'll have to do.
Jenny's not one to be so easily defeated. Instead of the nice coffee break, she decides to first stop by her shop. She's happy to have been able to establish her own business in Gotland, loves her homeland, the vast open landscape, and is still convinced that her sheep's pelts offer great potential. In her little shop, she sells products such as sweaters, jackets, pillows, scarves, and felt slippers, all made from the wool of her Gotland sheep, the sheep she raises where she too wants to live.
Well, I think that when you're born and raised in Gotland, you have it in your blood. And then it's very hard to move away from here. When I lived in Stockholm, I was always homesick, longing to come back here. I remember it so well. Every time I took the ferry back and saw Gotland on the horizon, tears came to my eyes.
Gotland has an offshore satellite, the much smaller island Faroe. Only a narrow strip of sea separates it from Gotland. Ferries offer regular service between the two, free of charge. In days gone by, the huge herring catch here was a valuable trade product. Traditional Lenten fare, a war ration, brined with salt from the Lüneburg Heath, the Nordic fish staple became a Europe-wide export hit. But that's all history now. Commercial fishery, all but extinct. Herring, long since a scarcity. But the fishermen's cottages remain untouched. Historical preservation law prohibits any changes, not even to the faded curtains behind the now dull windows. No-nonsense conservation. Go fishing here today, and you're more likely to catch cod than herring. Remnants of centuries gone by can be found on Faroe in the form of the raukas, limestone pillars molded into strange forms by the surf and the last ice age. Relics from a time when the island of Gotland was still in the southern hemisphere, slowly migrating northwards courtesy of continental drift. An oddity of geological history. When the Raukas crossed the equator 500 million years ago, they were covered with corals, the traces of which can still be found in the reef limestone today. Today we've gone from Fotteviken through Småland to the Crystal Kingdom by Costa, then to Gotland and Faroe. After the stop in Visby, the cruise ship will now set off to navigate the Stockholm archipelago, the skerries of the capital. "5 o'clock in the morning on the bridge. In July, the sun rises early. These skerries, 22,000 rocky island splinters, are also a remnant of the last ice age. It is said that every Swede dreams of a vacation house, preferably at water's edge. And 1 in 5 actually does own such a sommarstuga, usually simple and remote. Modern ships use mainly electronic navigation technology under the constant observation of the crew on the bridge. GPS, radar, and current route-related data from the internet help them stay on course. But when the cruise liner nears a tight spot, manual navigation is still the trusted method of choice. The pilot calls out the exact coordinates, and the helmsman repeats every command before executing it.
136.
At the Oxdjupet Narrows, the Ox Trough, the fairway is just 180 meters wide. Starboard and port side alike, there's no room for mistakes. The responsibility at moments like this doesn't weigh that heavily when you've got such nice conditions. It's more difficult in bad weather or when seas are rough. Then you do notice the extra pressure, the responsibility it puts on you. But today, with 2 professional pilots here, everything's a bit easier than usual. We can now actually navigate completely digitally. But you still can't do the job with technology alone. The technology is so advanced that you can stay within 10 centimeters, almost exactly on course, but it still comes down to having the right feel for it. And it always makes good sense to have the fairway expert, as we say, on board. Because if buoy X drifted off course yesterday, he'll know about it today, whereas I'll hear about it a week later at the earliest. Steel drum buoys aid orientation. If they're displaced by a storm, navigation is that much more difficult. Obviously, it's better to be forewarned. Two hours later, arrival in Stockholm, 7:50 a.m. Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. The city and its catchment area are home to more than 1/5 of the country's total population of 10 million. Those who've slept through the early morning passage through the Skerries can use the day's shore leave to see the city and experience the archipelago from the water. For example, on a rib boat excursion. But strict regulations apply. Every passenger must sign a limitation of liability agreement and wear a life jacket. And anyone with back problems need not apply. It's soon clear why. It's quite a sporting enterprise. At up to 70 kilometers per hour, intrepid day trippers get the white-knuckle tour of the Stockholm archipelago. Sweden is known as a country without fences. Anyone can dock a canoe or pitch a tent wherever they please, as long as no trash is left behind and the owner's privacy is respected. Huge parcels of land are often so poorly marked that even the owners don't know just where the borders of their private property are. Nowadays, many Swedes own their own boat. Not a canoe or bark, but a motorboat that can get you from Stockholm harbor out to the Skerries in half an hour. But if you don't have your own boat, no worries. You can have yourself chauffeured home in a water taxi. Bo Linden used to be in the Navy, but wanted to live independently and built himself a boat. Since then, he's used it to tour the Skerries from early morning till late into the night. And sometimes, in the off-season, even in this densely populated archipelago, he and his taxi are all by themselves.
Det är bara jag.
Here it's just me, the white-tailed eagles, ospreys and seals.
Som är det.
The weather is highly changeable, but that's what makes it so fantastic. I've spent my whole life in the Stockholm archipelago.
Nej, jag kan inte tänka.
I really can't imagine living without all this here. I get my nourishment, so to speak, from it, from the Skerries and the sea.
Skärgården och havet. Jag brukar säga...
I always say, in your mother's womb, you float in a pool of amniotic fluid.
Det här är mitt foster.
This is my amniotic fluid, the Stockholm archipelago. He's been doing his job for more than 20 years now, in summer and in the winter, as long as the ice floes don't put a freeze on boating activities. A stopover at Vaxholm, one of the larger islands. This is where Captain Bo Linden fuels up for his tours. At the adjoining kiosk, he stocks up on the other necessary odds and ends. For example, a new Swedish flag.
Ska jag skriva på? Hur går det bra?
The high winds of recent weeks have left the old one too tattered, he says. More or less all year round, Bo ferries tourists, real estate brokers and residents, tows broken down boats, and delivers basic supplies to the islanders. Very few people still live in the archipelago year-round. Some come here after a hard day's work in the city just for a restful night, or for the weekend, and of course, for the long vacation.
Det är jättemånga som lever och bor.
Many people come and live here in the summer, in their houses on the islands, but only in the summer.
Kanske 3 månader.
For 3 months maybe, and then, click, everything's shut off. Real estate prices have soared in recent years. Even smaller houses now often cost over €1 million. Life in the archipelago was completely different when Bo was a child.
Det som har förändrats.
The archipelago has changed. It's more dead here now. Back in, say, the 50s and 60s, there were little shops and gas stations everywhere.
Kanske på 50- och 60-talet så fanns det små handelsbodar och bensinstationer. De låg var en där.
One here, one there, or over there. And many families lived here.
Och det blev liksom en
So there were fixed points, so to speak, where you could meet up with people all year round.
hjälp eller men det där
But our tax system has destroyed all that, because suddenly property taxes were introduced, and for a seafront property, they were very high.
en fastighetsskatt. Och hade man ett hus
So if you were a fisherman, or you ran a gas station, or had a little shop with one employee,
fiskare
you also had a seafront property,
eller en handelsbod
which was quite expensive all of a sudden.
men helt plötsligt
But those people had very modest incomes. They couldn't afford to live here anymore.
ganska lite inkomster. Så de hade ju inte
And that's what makes the big difference. That's why not so many people live here anymore.
Skärgården det bor inte så många fast boende.
This gardening team had brought their tools and machines over to get a seafront property ready for viewing. Now they're heading back to the mainland.
A lot of things, a lot of things.
Real estate agents and prospective buyers are part of Beau's customer base. Assisting with sea burials used to be a regular source of income, but not so much anymore, due to stricter legislation. We take the boat out, and when we stopped, things got very emotional. We'd cut the engine, there'd be a bit of music, someone would say a few words, and then the ashes were strewn in the water. And then there'd usually be some champagne or something. And then we just take a moment and let ourselves drift along. And some flowers would be scattered around the boat and people would talk to each other, maybe. For many families, it was a very nice ceremony. Back in Stockholm, the city was built 7 centuries ago on 14 islands, strips of land that sometimes had to be wrested from the sea. The name Stockholm comes from stock, which means log or pole, and home, basically an islet. Nowadays, Greater Stockholm is home to well over 2 million people. Here, in a large park area, we come upon a rather odd-looking soccer pitch. Somehow wavy and asymmetrical. This dribbler here is one of the creators of this mogul field, artist Johan Strom. The former Swedish fencing champion also knows how to handle a ball, with no opponent in this case. On a quiet Sunday morning, the neighboring schools are closed. Otherwise, this place would be a hive of activity. This is a film shot some time ago that shows how the park is used, how much it's used. It's often full of young people who come here spontaneously and use the field, play, and have fun. Seeing that warms my heart. The idea was to make a soccer field that would be more of a game of life playing field, because the ball never goes in the direction you want. The two halves of the bridge are not of equal size. Life is simply an unfair game, and not everyone can become a soccer star like Zlatan. Johan Strom likes designing playgrounds best. He built this one, featuring his fruit sculptures when he was a young father, 20 years ago. I find making applied art particularly interesting. Art that people appreciate because they can use it, because it's interactive. In his studio, Johan has developed objects that light up. The thing about Sweden is that for long periods of the year, it's very dark here. So these sculptures also have a security and well-being factor. Johan's area of expertise is art for public spaces. He and a colleague are now busy designing a playground for the Swedish House of History, time machine that will enable children to experience the past. Here there are several mirrors made of polished steel, and they result in a mirroring effect that allows you to reflect yourself infinitely forwards or backwards in time. And then you climb further along here and you come to a megaphone. We still don't have all the kinks worked out. We'll offer a journey in time that allows you to stroll past the facades of the individual centuries to finally end up in this building, which you will enter by sliding down a slide.
som kommer att bli en rutschkana ner.
A slide into Sweden's present. Or into the future. Sweden is on the move. Stockholm is a key port for many Baltic Sea journeys. Numerous ferries from neighboring countries stop here as well. The first leg of our journey through the Baltic Sea region draws to a close. Time to cast off and head for Finland. That's the trouble with cruises. There's so little time to see the sights before you have to say farewell again. Who knows? Maybe some of the cruise passengers will return on their own and take more time for the places and the people, and for many, many more discoveries. During the night, the maritime giant traversed the Gulf of Bothnia, passing islands where Swedish is still spoken, although they have long belonged to Finland. Off to new horizons, the journey continues eastwards. Our next destination? Helsinki.